Welcome into episode 3 of the PG Draft Stock Report. I'm one half of your hosting duo. My name is Brian Sikowski. I'm joined as always by Vinny Servino, who you can see via the other camera on this broadcast. We are going to go back through the prep bats again this week. Last week, we had to break it down. We had to keep it on prep infielders just because there's so many of them. So this week we're gonna follow that up. We're gonna finish it off with the prep outfielders and catchers. We lumped them together. There's 9 or 10 guys we're gonna talk about. But without any further ado, we're gonna jump right into it. Vin, what seems to be the themes of this particular sect of high school players?
Yes, Zach. I think when you look at kind of the differences between the prep shortstop and the prep outfielder class, obviously, I think the prep shortstops have a little bit more of the headliners, but the prep outfielders definitely have their fair share of athleticism. There's a number of multi-sport guys here when you talk about guys like Will Taylor, who's dual commit for football and baseball for Clemson. Guys like Lonnie White, who might be suiting up for Penn State on Saturdays come the college football season. And then when you talk about other guys like Benny Montgomery, who's a freak athlete in the outfield, and Harry Ford, who's one of the best and most athletic catchers that we've seen in the prep class in recent years.
Ford is someone that's talked about like almost with awe as far as scouting circles go. Not that like this is going to be the 1-1 guy or like this is the freak of the class, but like he is extremely unique. You know, we've heard the phrase he's a unicorn from multiple people, including our own mouths at some point over the years. But a guy with that level of twitch who can catch but also kind of play center and has some power, and it's a plus run. It's a really weird, unique profile that I don't know if it's going to help him or hurt him, but it seems like right now it's just helping him. Like that's a dude who looks like he's going to be gone by pick 20.
Yeah, no, like you said, he's a unicorn, and like he's also one of the toughest kids as far as on the field, off the field stuff goes. You know, one memory comes to mind seeing him at Jupiter as an underclassman. He wore a fastball off the nose, broke his nose, bleeding everywhere. His coach has got his ice pack up to it, and Harry's trying to fight with his coach, like, no, I need to get back in the game. Like, Harry, man, you're an underclassman, first of all. Second of all, that's a broken nose, man. So he's definitely a freak, and there's some monstrous upside there.
And we don't want to gloss over Will Taylor. We mentioned him. Vin did a dual sport commit to Clemson, much like Bubba Chandler, who we talked about last week. Committed to play quarterback / slot receiver, maybe along with the outfield. This is a dude when you talk about twitch, this is the guy with twitch. This is an 80 athlete who's been an 80 runner this spring. Added some power to his frame. Vin, I know you and I both liked him last summer, but we were waiting on that power a little bit. We wanted to see more impact in the offensive game, but he's always been a runner. He's always been a defender. He's always been an athlete, just a guy who's kind of risen up boards more this spring. And we can't really say the word freak without talking about Benny, can we? Vin, I mean, folks through Benny Montgomery for us, please.
Yeah, you know, Montgomery kind of obviously well known as an underclassman, burst onto the scene there at the main event a couple years back. Really worked on his swing in terms of trying to quiet that hand hitch. It's been a very big, exaggerated one that, you know, scouts are very fickle creatures, and so they need to be assuaged a little bit in terms of being comforted with hitches and weird things when it comes to hit tool. So he's tried to quiet that down a little bit. It's still like, you know, 70 bat speed. He's a 70 runner. He'll play center field and has a hose. And he's just out there hitting bombs in Pennsylvania this spring. You know, he's been one of the more, I think, consistent bats when it comes to Northeast prep bats go, as far as those guys go. And speaking of Northeast, you know, a guy that has barely even started playing yet, Joe Mack, you know, a personal favorite here on the scouting staff. We know that he's one of the best pure hit tools in the class. There's been some comparisons, at least having some conversations with scouts between, like, do you prefer Joe Mack or Tyler Soderstrom, the first round pick in the A's last year? So there's definitely some similarities there, but Mack's another guy who really rakes, has big power. He's got another guy with a 70 arm. And he's definitely a guy who's in play starting there in the back end of the first round too.
Yeah, and that's a guy like, and you bring up Soderstrom, and I think it's a good comparison for a couple reasons. Namely, you know, there's a bunch of concerns like, can this guy catch? Well, like, does it even matter? You know, you're talking about a dude, you're buying a bat here, and it's the way the A's bought the bat with Soderstrom too. You know, they the third base, right field, first base, whatever it ends up being, maybe not catcher. And Max potentially got some of that utility as well, and you're mostly just buying the bat there. Moving on a little bit down the list, these are more the guys we could see back of the first into the comp round as an overpay, something like that. Lonnie White, Vin mentioned, the 4-star wide receiver signee to Penn State, who correct me if I'm wrong, Vin, I believe he doesn't even plan to play baseball if he goes to college. I think if he goes to college, he's football only or something along those lines. So if someone wants him to play pro baseball, now seems to be the time. And he's definitely had a good spring for Malvern Prep out there in the Northeast, a perennial powerhouse high school program, hitting for power, showing off that athleticism. He was the MVP of WWBA 17U last summer. Lots to like there. And then moving on to a guy with some similar physical capabilities and one of our favorites again, and Josh Baez. Vin, I know that we all love Baez for the tools and all that, but there's some more nuance to his game than I think folks give him credit for, don't you think?
Yeah, a guy like Baez, he's going to check every single box, especially when you're talking about Northeast guys, Northeast prep guys. He's 6'4", 225, terrific athlete, has an absolute hand cannon. Something a little bit that we talked about before getting on the air here is that, like, worst case scenario is like Baez can run it up to 97, 98 on the bump there. So, like, there's some two-way upside. Granted, I think most people in the industry prefer him as an outfielder, given the sort of upside that he possesses there. But yeah, he's kind of went to every stop there along the way. And don't be wrong, there's going to be some swing and miss there. There's an element of some risk when it comes to the offensive profile, but really at every mark that he hit last summer in terms of events and major national type events, he at least performed to a certain extent, rocking some balls to both gaps. And those kind of track records are extremely important for Northeast guys who may not face the best competition come next spring, because that at least gives you some benchmarks against some national caliber players.
And speaking of guys who put up benchmarks last year, for a stretch, this dude was the best player in the country. James Wood, we headed right back down to your area there by IMG. Hard to imagine a dude having a louder 4-week stretch or so, like he did last summer. Stretch mostly the month of July, or you know what I mean, the second week of July to the second week of August, whatever that was. This is a dude whose draft stock is kind of yo-yoed a little bit, is what it seems like, but it seems to be trending back up now. I mean, this dude's got stupid power, man. Like that's the guy. Like that's the guy who could be the 50 home run guy if such a thing exists as far as projecting prep guys out. Where do we expect him to go at this point?
Yeah, so for as much as a guy like Wood's draft stock has fluctuated, the more I think it has kind of almost stayed the same. I think coming into the year, it's like, yeah, he's probably a back end type of the first, more like 20 to 35 guy. And I think, we've had the ups and downs. He ends up hitting 240 in the spring, which is obviously not a good mark, but when you consider the IMG competition and that sort of thing, and you look back now and yeah, he's sort of a 20 to 35 guy, right? I think he's absolutely in play earlier. I think he's going to be compared against those guys that we mentioned before, like Benny and Will Taylor and Joe Mack. But there's nobody that offers the upside that James Wood does. And he's a guy, too, that we talk a lot about two sport players here. He was a big basketball player for a while. Only recently, over the last couple of years or so, to be really fully committed to baseball 100%. And so there's a guy there with that kind of upside. Like you said, 50 home runs playing right field. Like those guys don't grow on trees, especially not with that kind of size and athleticism, too. So he's definitely one that could go and play much earlier than that. He's definitely the type of player that a team falls in love with kind of in that teens area, and wouldn't shock us at all to go around there either.
And I think he's in play. You mentioned 20 to 35 or 25 to 40 or whatever, and that's kind of where we have him ranked and where we probably will end up having him ranked. But I think his range starts where mid-teens, pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're not having conversations there, you're probably not doing your due diligence.
Right. I just there was that stretch, and there's a lot of what have you done for me lately, but that dude was hitting tanks at his eyes and doing it on breaking ball. Like, it was unbelievable last summer for a stretch. And it just hard to forget that type of ability and type of performance. Moving on a little bit, Vin, let's stay in Florida. Jay Allen, who we have right there in the comp round on the draft board, another super tools up athletic guy. He's a quarterback too. I don't think he's committed to Florida to play both or anything like that. But either way, really talented quarterback. Center fielder, athlete, has some juice. You've seen him this spring. I have not. Take it away.
Yeah, Allen is a guy, like you said, I don't believe he'll be playing football in the SEC at quarterback, but, he's a guy who was an Elite 11 guy. He went to all those big camps. He was a big recruit on the trail. And when you look at the guy, it's kind of weird. It's almost like the reverse profile. You look at a guy like him, you assume like big toolsy, big risk type guy, and it's more of the opposite. Like, don't get me wrong, he can run, he can go get it in the outfield, that sort of thing, but he may be one of the more underrated and more polished hit tools in the 2021 draft prep class than we talk about, really. It's an easy swing. There's such beautiful finish and follow through there with the bat. It's elite hand-eye coordination. He's come into a lot more power this spring, which is something that scouts wanted to see, especially when you're betting on a bat-heavy profile like that. But yeah, if it's a guy who can play center field and hit above 300, like some guys think he can, then I mean, you're not talking about a guy who you need to worry about the power because he's playing center field and hitting above 300.
Really high-end bats of ball data there from him insofar as contact rates and hard contact rates too. And I think that's the main thing that's seen him fly up boards this spring, along with the athleticism, obviously, in the center field utility. But
yeah, and Alan, actually, if you'll allow me here for a minute, brings up kind of an interesting conversation that we've talked about these guys before. Guys like Jay Allen, Will Taylor, Lonnie White, Bubba Chandler. I know this is something that like gets talked about on the airwaves a lot of the times, but like, oh, pick baseball over football, that sort of thing. But you're seeing a draft class where it's a lot of guys that kind of have that choice. And so a lot of teams there have to make that decision, like, will we go buy the football guy? And that just strikes me as one of the more interesting, kind of less talked about factors here in the draft.
And I think it's one of those things that we've talked about already, where we talked about how maybe this is the weird bubble year where it's more prep heavy.
Yeah.
And in that sense, like in a normal year, like, no, let that dude who wants to play football go play football, you know, whatever. And now this year, it's like, no, let's go get that guy. We actually do like him a lot.
Yeah, we've seen him 100 at-bats over the last calendar year.
And we're going to close this down coming up towards my neck of the woods in the Ohio Valley, and that's Daylen Lile, another perfect game All-American. This is a guy who's maybe a little lighter on the tools, you know, the impact tools than some others on this list, but he makes up for it in his instincts. He makes up for it with the purity of the hit tool. This is a guy that we've said for years now, like, this is an above-average hit tool. He's added some juice. He's added some speed and athleticism. You could potentially see him in center field now. And Vin, again, this is a guy you saw this spring that I have not. Like, you made that trip to Kentucky for the Louisville series. What was it like there for you?
Yeah, this is kind of similar to some of the we had talked about, I think, a couple of days ago, if you recall, whereas, you know, there's guys that we see a lot, and there's guys that we see from when they're 14 to when they're draft eligible. And Lyle is one of those guys. Lyle is one of those guys that we look at every stop, every turn there. We're like, he rakes. And you know what he's done? He's raked this spring. It's a really, really good hit tool, man. He doesn't swing and miss. The swing is not like smooth like butter or like 70 bat speed or anything, but it's smooth. It's short to the ball. It's easy. He barrels balls to both gaps. Just burgeoning power there. The ball carries that to left center. Do I think he's a center fielder long term? I think that's definitely debatable, but he's an above average runner underway, and he's playing center this year. He's playing it well, especially when you look at the bat is sort of the thing that raises that profile maybe a half grade everywhere else because you like the bat so much. So yeah, you can squint and see like an everyday regular in center who's an above average runner. Oh, and he's going to hit for the monstrous average.
Yep. And Vin, I think we're going to shut it down for this episode without diving too deep down the draft board. We are through the prep bats on these undefined, arbitrary endpoint. This is who we're going to talk about rankings as far as position by position goes. We'll be back next week. We are going to try and do something along the lines of a mailbag episode. Get some questions on Twitter and answer them live on the show for you guys. And other than that, we're just going to keep previewing position groups. We'll get into the college guys. We will get into the prep arms. And we're just inching our way towards the draft. We're down under 2 months now. So we're getting excited. We hope you are excited as well. For Vinny, I'm Brian. We'll talk to you next week.